Very often, when Path of Exile has a major Atlas expansion, the League mechanic that goes along with it is pretty mediocre. At the best, you get something like Ritual that integrates really nicely with gameplay, and if you ignore it, you don't feel terrible. If you're willing to do it, it's reasonably rewarding. You don't have to deal with looking through a bunch of menus while enemies are hitting you, as everything's nicely sectioned off from normal gameplay. At worst, you get something like Metamorph, which when it was released was a buggy mess. I don't know how many people who were watching this video were around then, but if you weren't there, and you didn't experience it, first of all, a lot of the mechanics were bugged and did way more damage than they should. Second of all, you had to pick up every single organ that you wanted to use. That's right, all of them. And no, you couldn't filter them with your loot filter either, which made for an experience so miserable that early on in 3.9, a lot of players, including myself, just weren't doing the League mechanic. This was of course fixed, and the system was streamlined later. And similarly, Ritual was made a core part of the game, and it's done pretty well ever since. But what about Arch Nemesis? Well, if we look at Arch Nemesis as just what you do and how you fight the enemies, I don't think it's too bad. If there was a future implementation where you just fight Arch Nemesis rares with random modifiers, kind of like a Super Juice rare in your map, I don't really see any problems. And yet, a lot of players have been skipping Arch Nemesis, myself included. So why is that? Well, it stems from a few problems. First of all, the original idea was you'd get 2 or 3 Arch Nemesis pieces, and then you'd be able to put those together, so you'd do one once every 2 maps, or maybe even once every 3 if you're not picking up every single piece. The problematic reality is, you often get 4 to 7 in a single map. With the more you juice the map, the more you get. Which means you're going to be getting way more potential pieces than you're ever actually going to be able to use if you run moderately juiced content. And this is where things get a little bit problematic. You can vastly simplify your Arch Nemesis experience by running a loot filter. If you do, you just won't see a lot of parts. But then, how do you get the ones that you want to show up? Well, the system's a little bit opaque. The community's figured out that certain parts drop from monsters with certain attributes. And that's about as far as anyone's gotten. I have yet to see a definitive guide on where pieces drop and how to target farm them. Which leads to people saying, yeah, but how do I get Vampiric? Where's Frenzied? Or why am I always short of this one crucial piece? When a system's so opaque that people don't figure it out, even 2 months into the mechanic, there's going to be a lot of people who say, this isn't worth the effort. I'll hide all but one specific recipe, and when I can do that recipe, cool, but if I don't get the pieces I need for 4, 5, or 10 maps, then I'm not going to be engaging with it very often. Of course, the exception to this is when it's absolutely so rewarding that you have to. And if you look at something like an Innocence Touch recipe, it'll certainly look that way. But when you factor in the massive amount of time it takes, possibly 100 maps worth of effort, just to assemble that one Innocence Touch combo, it starts to look really mediocre. Getting 1, 2, or even 4 Exalted Prophet every 100 maps might sound really good if you're broke, but when you look at the actual amount of time it takes to run 100 maps, and if you look at the profit that you get from all 100, then it's not really going to stack up. This is especially the case if you factor in all the small currencies, things that people pick up that they often don't think of as profit because they're so focused on Chaos and Exalts, that usually add up to well over half of your total profit from any given map. All of a sudden, that 1 to 4x in profits could be 1 to 4x out of 10, or maybe even 1 to 4x out of 40, assuming you're juicing the map enough. And all of a sudden, it doesn't seem worth it to go through all that effort, especially given the fact that the storage space is very limited. You're not able to store that many different pieces, which means you can only have so many projects going at a given time. Furthermore, the filtering system and the UI is very problematic. If anything, if you're highlighting a certain piece, that should automatically change your loot filter to also highlight it. But instead, you have to change your loot filter manually, so there's really no point in highlighting the piece unless you just happen to lose what you were looking for in your stash with a collection of all the pieces that you needed anyway. This gets even more complicated when you select multiple recipes. The way I thought it might work is if I selected multiple recipes, one would highlight in red, another in blue, and a third in green. That way I can easily tell, alright, this is for this recipe, and this is for that recipe. No, they all highlight in white. They highlight in the same color, which means if you're highlighting multiple recipes at once to, say, do a complicated one like Kitava Touched, all of a sudden it becomes way too easy to mix up your pieces and do the recipe wrong. Now I have several ideas on how this problem can be fixed, but before I get into them, if you're enjoying the video, a quick reminder to leave a like as it really helps out for the YouTube algorithm. If you have any thoughts on Arch Nemesis as a League mechanic, or how you'd like to see it implemented in the future, then stick around for my solutions and let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And finally, for more Path of Exile content, sub to the channel and ring the bell to be notified whenever I upload, or just hop into my Discord as I announce all my videos from both this channel and my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, in Discord. But now, since I've outlined the problem, let's talk about some solutions. The first and simplest solution would be pre-assembled Arch Nemesis monsters that just randomly appear in your map, kind of like Rogue Metamorphs. And personally, this is the one that I like the most. I like the idea of there being super strong monsters in Path of Exile, things that aren't necessarily the map boss, but are still very dangerous. You'll have to play around them or potentially just run away from them. Where I could see this being very problematic is Hardcore. After all, dealing with something like an enemy that has Malediction Aura, increasing your damage taken by 50%, could easily turn lethal quickly. So that's definitely a problematic downside. But at the same time, if these were random monsters that appeared in your map, I could see it being very profitable. In fact, I could see it being more profitable than they are now, since you don't have to go through all of the effort of collecting and assembling the recipe, you just get the loot. Having to go through a lot of effort, over 100 maps, to assemble an Innocence Touched for 1 to 4x is probably going to lead to feelings of disappointment. But getting one completely for free every 200 maps might feel pretty awesome. And in terms of Hardcore, remember, these monsters would still be chained up. Much like Essence monsters, you'd still have to go activate them. So even if it is super deadly, you're making the choice, yes, I'm ready for the danger and I'm willing to accept the consequences. If you don't want to deal with it, just don't click the statue. I suppose if the design was particularly sadistic, then maybe they could just be wandering freely. But I think keeping them chained up is both more thematic and also helpful in terms of players managing risk versus reward. Not that it's going to stop anyone on softcore from clicking the most deadly because that has the biggest shinies, and then dying, and then complaining about Reddit at the result of their actions. Now another solution could be dedicated Arch Nemesis maps. This would be a map that you go into, there's several chained monsters, and just like before, they have random rewards. Or maybe just like before, they have pieces that drop, but the pieces that drop make one specific recipe or 2 specific recipes, and are all linked together. To me, this feels a little bit too overcomplicated, and I don't see any benefits versus just a simple click monster get loot. Or, of course, click monster, die to monster, complain on Reddit. And finally, what about a solution that does keep the recipe aspect? Well, in this case, that would require a complete redesign of the UI. First of all, highlighting recipes should absolutely automatically change your loot filter, to use some sort of default coloring scheme where things are either de-emphasized or hidden, and also allow you to apply that loot filter to your Arch Nemesis stash. The stash itself, instead of just auto-organizing pieces to the top, which makes organization a nightmare, should probably have a second page, where things only go there if you decide to place them. This way, it can be kept untradeable, while also allowing players to organize things in a way that makes sense to them. I always tried to line up various pieces of recipes, but then as I'd go through, especially as my stash got full, random bits of junk would just get mixed in with those recipes, and as a result, I'd have to take extra time to then sort out my sorting, which was just needless frustration and a lot of a reason behind why I stopped doing the mechanic altogether. Personally, I'm not in love with the sorting. It feels very tedious, and it doesn't really feel that rewarding. I'm not in love with the fact that you have very limited highlighting options, and you can't highlight based on your loot filter, a technology that's been in the game ever since 3.13, and would apply perfectly here, since this is something that can be filtered, and it's something that's untradeable, meaning you're only going to want things that you value rather than something that's objectively valuable. And finally, the UI they added for recipes was just really, really clunky. I almost felt more comfortable organizing my recipes in Google Sheets, because at least there I had functionality that could dynamically show and hide recipes in different colors. So as I got pieces, yes, I'd have to manually select things and tick them off, but I'd know what I was missing and I know what I needed to get it. So if they are going to keep the UI in-game, and it's not going to automatically synchronize to your loot filter, then at the very least there needs to be some way to say, look, these are the ones that are highlighted for the recipe, and then these are the things missing in red that you need for the recipe, so that you can better keep an eye out for them as you're doing your mapping. I don't think Arch Nemesis is offensively bad. I don't think it's so riddled with issues that it has to be removed. It's certainly no Scourge, and I completely understand why most of GGG's focus was on the core game changes, the rework to the Atlas, the Eater of Worlds and the Searing Exarch influence, and all that. The main selling point of an expansion is the expansion, not the League mechanic that happens to go along with it. Even if Arch Nemesis went core with no changes at all, I wouldn't be all that mad. But it's probably not something I'd go out of my way to engage with either. And while I do like most of the core changes that came about in 3.17, I can't help but feel that most players probably feel similarly about Arch Nemesis. At the same time, it's not great as a game developer to go through all that effort to add things to your game and then constantly throw them away. This is one of the problems that's plagued World of Warcraft for I don't really know how long. They go through all the effort to create different zones, storylines, quests, and a leveling experience, and then with the next expansion and the next level cap, well, it's all just kind of thrown out. People just skip it with level boosts, or grind through it with EXP gear as fast as they can. So, if at all possible, I would like to see Arch Nemesis used in the future. And I think it'd be pretty easy to implement as a mechanic if we look at the good things, the fights against the monsters themselves, the new affixes they have, and the new level of risk and reward that brings, rather than dealing with a clunky recipe system and all the stuff that most players were turned off by. What about you? Are you still doing Arch Nemesis, or have you started skipping it as well? Maybe you're skipping it from day one. And if so, what changes would you need to see to make you do Arch Nemesis? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to put them down in the comments below, or join the Discord, where you can ask questions, get build help, and hang out with the community. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. They're awesome, and they get to show it by having their name on screen in the credits of all my videos. So if you want to see your name here, be sure to check the link in the description. For more general gaming content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, and if you want a water bottle or a cool shirt, I have a link to my official merch shop in the description. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.